I didn't move to Phoenix for the sunshine or the cheap rent. I moved because I needed distance. Back in Chicago, everything felt poisoned. The breakup with Mark had been messy, dragging on for weeks until we were just strangers sleeping in the same apartment. Losing my marketing job right after that was the final shove. It felt like the city itself was pushing me out, like every train ride, every corner bar, every coffee shop whispered reminders of everything I'd lost. So, I left. I sold what little furniture I had, packed my clothes into 2 suitcases, and drove west until the flat land turned into endless desert. My new place was a 1-bedroom in a building called Desert Palms, tucked on a quiet street with a half-empty parking lot. Beige walls, thin carpet, and cabinets that looked older than me, but it was cheap, and most importantly, it was mine. The first few days I stayed busy. Trips to Target, scrubbing counters, rearranging my desk so the little window in the living room gave me decent light for freelance graphic design. I even found a grocery store I liked, Fry's, about 10 minutes away, and started recognizing the cashier with the nose ring who always bagged heavy stuff like he was stacking bricks. The building itself was quiet. A lot of older tenants, the kind who keep their heads down. The only person I really talked to was Frank, a retired guy in his 60s who lived downstairs. He had a different baseball cap every time I saw him and always asked, "How's the heat treating you?" with a half smile. That was fine by me. I didn't want drama. I wanted routine. It was late February when I first saw the new tenant moving into 207, the apartment across from mine. I came back from a Target run, arms full of paper towels and frozen dinners, when I nearly tripped over a box in the hall. "Sorry about that," a voice said. I looked up and saw him, a tall guy, maybe early 30s with messy blonde hair and cargo shorts. He had that slightly sunburned look of someone who didn't bother with sunscreen. He smiled, shifting the box out of the way. "Name's Jake. Just moved in." I adjusted the grocery bags in my arms. "Hannah, I'm across the hall. Welcome, I guess." He chuckled lightly. "Thanks. Still figuring out where everything goes." It wasn't a weird interaction, just normal neighbor small talk. But when I stepped into my apartment and set my bags down, I had this odd sense that he'd stayed standing in his doorway for a few extra seconds, like he'd waited until he was sure I closed my door before moving. Over the next few weeks I saw him a lot, sitting on the stairs tying his shoes, jogging in the evenings, carrying laundry down to the basement. Always friendly, always quick to say hi. Nothing about him screamed dangerous. Still, sometimes when I caught him looking at me, there was something too steady about his gaze, like he didn't blink enough. I told myself I was overthinking. New city, new building. I was just hyper-aware. But deep down, a little voice whispered that boring might not last. It started so small I almost brushed it off. One Tuesday evening in March, I came home from Fry's and noticed my welcome mat flipped upside down. Not kicked or crumpled, perfectly flipped. For a second I laughed, thinking maybe some kids thought it was funny. I fixed it and went inside. The next week I ordered a pair of sneakers online. The box showed up already opened. The shoes were inside, untouched, but the tape had been cut so cleanly it looked like someone used a box cutter. My stomach twisted. I told myself it was the delivery guy again. Then came the text. One night I was scrolling TikTok in bed when my phone buzzed with a notification. Message sent to my ex, Mark. The message said, "Do you still think about it?" My chest tightened. I hadn't typed that. I hadn't even opened that conversation in months. I checked my apps, ran a quick virus scan, but nothing came up. My fingers trembled as I deleted the message. The next evening, I saw Jake sitting on the stairwell scrolling on his phone. He looked up and grinned like nothing in the world was wrong. "You settling in okay?" he asked. "Yeah," I said, maybe too fast. His grin stayed a second longer than it should have before he looked back down. I tried not to think about it. But 2 days later, I came home and froze. Leaning against my door was a Polaroid photo. It was blurry, but clear enough. It was me, standing in the laundry room downstairs, holding my basket. I spun around, scanning the hallway. Jake's door was closed. The hallway was empty. I picked up the photo with shaking hands and shoved it into my bag, then slammed my door shut and threw on the chain. I didn't sleep much that night. Every sound in the hallway made me sit up in bed. By the next morning, I had convinced myself it was a prank. Maybe someone thought they were being funny. But the pit in my stomach wouldn't leave. That weekend, when I passed Frank downstairs, I asked casually, "Hey, do you know the new guy across from me?" He frowned. "Jake? Only seen him around. Quiet. Keeps to himself." Then he paused like he was going to add something but changed his mind. "Why?" I shook my head. No reason. But it didn't feel like no reason anymore. The Polaroid wasn't the end. It was just the beginning. I started keeping a notebook. Every weird thing that happened, I wrote it down. Time, date, what I found. I needed to see it on paper, to prove to myself it wasn't just in my head. March 22nd, welcome mat flipped. March 29th, package opened. April 3rd, photo left at door. Then came the Wi-Fi. One night I logged on and froze. My network name no longer said Hannah207. It said, "I miss you." I stared at the screen, throat tight. I checked the list of connected devices. One of them was named Jake's iPhone. I grabbed my keys, ran down to my car, and sat there for nearly an hour, shaking. Eventually, I forced myself back upstairs, double-checking the locks 3 times before bed. The next morning, Jake was crouched outside his door, tying his sneakers. He looked up and smiled like always. "Morning," he said. "Morning," I muttered. He tilted his head, studying me a second too long. "Rough night?" My chest went cold. How could he know? That same day, I bought a cheap indoor camera online, a small black cube that connected to my phone. I set it on the bookshelf facing my door. I told myself it was just for peace of mind. The first 2 nights, nothing. Just me coming and going. But on the 3rd night at 2:36 a.m., my phone buzzed, motion detected. I opened the footage and my breath caught in my throat. Jake, inside my apartment. He wasn't rushing, he wasn't stealing. He just stood in the middle of my living room, arms at his sides, staring down the hallway toward my bedroom. For nearly 4 minutes. Then he turned and walked out. No sound. No forced entry. Just him, inside, like he belonged there. I replayed the clip over and over, my hands shaking so hard I could barely hold the phone. There was no mistaking him. No glitch. No way to explain it. By sunrise, I had 2 bags packed. I didn't care about breaking the lease or losing the deposit. I just needed out. I emailed the footage to the building office. Their reply was short and useless. "We suggest contacting local authorities." So I did. The officer at the station was younger, tired-looking. He watched the footage, nodded slowly, then asked, "Are you sure you locked your door?" "Yes," I snapped. "Every night. Triple-checked." He shrugged. "Without signs of forced entry, there's not much we can do. We'll file a report, change your locks, maybe stay somewhere else for a while." That was it. No confrontation, no arrest, nothing. I drove straight to San Diego that day, where my sister and her boyfriend lived. They cleared out the guest room, hugged me, told me I was safe now. I changed my phone number, bought a new laptop, tried to start fresh again. Weeks passed. My chest loosened. I started breathing easier. Until one Friday in May when a small package showed up on my sister's porch. No return address, just my name written in black marker. Inside was a single Polaroid. Me, standing in my sister's driveway. I didn't plan on moving to Spokane. It just happened. After my mom remarried in Phoenix, I felt like a guest in my own house. I was 23, drifting between odd jobs and community college classes I didn't really care about. My stepdad's constant advice and the tension at home finally pushed me out. Spokane was cheaper than Portland or Seattle, and I found a one-bedroom basement unit on Craigslist that I could actually afford. The ad described it as cozy and quiet, which sounded like exactly what I needed. The building was older, 4 floors, mostly young couples and retirees. My unit was 1B, tucked in the back corner with a narrow window that looked out at the parking lot. It smelled faintly of carpet cleaner and paint the day I moved in, which felt reassuring. At least someone had tried to make it livable. I worked part-time at a coffee shop downtown and picked up freelance graphic design projects online. It wasn't glamorous, but it kept me afloat. My life became a routine. Morning shifts at the cafe, afternoons at my laptop, late-night walks to the gas station for snacks when I couldn't focus. The first week was fine. Too fine, actually. I didn't hear much of anything through the walls, which surprised me for an old building. No barking dogs, no crying babies, not even footsteps overhead. Just quiet. Then one evening I met the guy upstairs. I was unlocking my door when I heard someone coming down the hall. He stopped right in front of me, tall, mid-30s, carrying a grocery bag. His hair was buzzed short, and he wore a flannel jacket even though it wasn't cold. "You must be new," he said, his voice flat but polite. "Yeah," I nodded. "Just moved into 1B. "Sam," he said, pointing up. "I'm right above you in 2B. We shook hands. His grip was a little too firm, the kind that lingers a second longer than you expect. "If you ever hear me moving around late, don't worry. I don't sleep much," he added. I smiled awkwardly. "No problem." That was it. Normal enough. Except later that night, around 2 a.m., I woke up to the sound of pacing. Slow, deliberate steps creaking right above my bed. Back and forth, steady like a metronome. I lay still, staring at the ceiling, convincing myself it was nothing. But the next night, it happened again. Same time, same rhythm. By the second week, I couldn't ignore it anymore. Every night at 2 a.m. sharp, Sam's footsteps started, not stomping or running, just measured pacing across the room above me. At work, I joked about being cursed with the world's most restless neighbor, but deep down it didn't feel funny. It felt intentional. One morning I ran into him outside the mailbox. He looked tired but alert, like someone who'd been awake for days. "You up late last night?" I asked casually. He gave me a strange half-smile. "I like the quiet hours. Easier to think." "Do you work at night?" "Not really," he said. "I just watch." The way he said it made my stomach flip. Watch what? The next few nights, the pacing grew louder. Then came the pauses. Long stretches of silence where I swore he was standing directly above me, not moving, just waiting. Sometimes I'd hear a faint, dragging noise, like a chair scraping across the floor. I bought noise-canceling headphones, but I could still feel the vibrations through the ceiling. My sleep schedule collapsed. I started showing up late to work, snapping at customers. My manager noticed, and I almost lost my shifts. Then, on a Tuesday morning, I found something outside my door, a folded piece of notebook paper. Inside, written in shaky block letters, "I can hear you too." No name, no explanation, just that. I brought it inside, stared at it for an hour, then stuffed it in a drawer. My brain went back and forth. Maybe it was a prank, maybe it wasn't from him, maybe I was overreacting. But when I got home that night, I noticed something else. My doormat was gone. The missing doormat shook me more than I wanted to admit. It wasn't valuable, just a cheap black mat I'd bought at Walmart, but someone had to unlock the building door and deliberately take it. That night the pacing was worse. Louder, almost angry. I pressed my pillow over my head until morning. 2 days later, my phone buzzed with a notification. A new Wi-Fi network had appeared on the list. Its name, 1B Doesn't Sleep. I froze, staring at the screen. I checked every other network in the building. Normal names. Netgear 23, Mike's Wi-Fi. But this one was targeted at me. I confronted Sam the next evening when I saw him carrying groceries up the stairs. My voice was shaky. Do you know anything about a Wi-Fi name that mentions me? He stopped mid-step and looked down at me. His eyes were steady, unblinking. Maybe people just notice things, he said. I swallowed hard. Like what? He smiled faintly. Like when you're awake, like when you're not. I stood frozen as he disappeared into his apartment. That night, I pushed my dresser in front of the door. I sat awake until sunrise, every creak of the building making my chest tighten. 2 days later, another note appeared under my door. This time it said, "You move too much in your sleep." I finally called building management. I explained everything, the pacing, the Wi-Fi name, the notes. They promised to look into it, but their tone was dismissive, like I was being paranoid. I thought about calling the police, but what would I even say? That my neighbor walked too loudly? That I felt watched? None of it sounded like enough. One night in December, the power went out during a windstorm. I lit a candle and sat on the couch, trying to calm down. At exactly 2 a.m., I heard it again. The pacing, but heavier this time, faster. Then silence. A minute later, 3 slow knocks on my ceiling. I held my breath. Then came his voice, muffled but clear, drifting through the floorboards. "I know you're listening." I didn't sleep. At dawn, I packed a bag, drove to a motel, and stayed there for 2 nights. When I came back, everything in my apartment looked untouched, except for one thing. On my kitchen table sat my missing doormat, folded neatly in half. I moved out a week later. It's been months now. I'm living with a friend across town. I still wake up at 2 a.m. most nights, heart racing, listening for footsteps that aren't there. But sometimes, when I check my phone, I still see it in the available networks list. 1B doesn't sleep. I'm not the type of person who ever pictured living in a small town again. I left right after high school, swore I'd never come back, but things change when your life falls apart. Last year, my girlfriend and I broke up. My job in the city dried up, and the apartment rent was killing me. So I packed what I could fit in my car and moved back east to a quiet town near Lake Erie called Milford. I rented a ground floor apartment at a place called Brookfield Court. Cheap, basic, 2 rooms, thin walls. It's the kind of complex where every door looks the same, beige siding and little square patios with cracked concrete. My unit was 1B. Across the walkway was 1A. I work night shifts now at a gas station off Route 12, so most of my days are flipped. I sleep late, wake up groggy around 2 or 3 in the afternoon, sit on the patio with a cigarette and just listen to the hum of cars going by. My only real routine is scrolling through job postings on my old laptop and cooking frozen meals before work. For the first month, I barely noticed the neighbor in 1A. The blinds were always drawn, no noise, no car in the lot. Then, one Thursday in late October, I saw him for the first time. Tall, maybe early 40s, shaved head, pale skin. He carried a plastic grocery bag in each hand and walked like his shoulders were too heavy. When our eyes met, he gave this small, polite smile, but it never reached his eyes. I lifted a hand, said, "Hey, how's it going?" He stopped, looked at me like he was deciding something and said, "You stay up late." I laughed awkwardly. "Yeah, night shifts." He nodded once, almost satisfied, and went inside. It should have been nothing, just small talk, but the way he said it stuck with me, like he'd been keeping track. For the next week, I started noticing him more, sometimes standing on his patio at odd hours, just staring out at the lot like he was waiting for someone. Sometimes I'd catch his blind shift when I came home after work. Little things that were easy to ignore at first, but it was the tapping that started it. 2 nights in a row around 3 a.m., I heard faint knocks from the shared wall between our bedrooms. Slow, deliberate, like a code. I tried to tell myself it was pipes, or maybe him hanging a picture. but the rhythm was too steady. And when I tapped back once, half joking, the noise stopped instantly. That silence was worse than the tapping. The knocking didn't happen every night, but when it did, it was always at the same time, just after 3:00 a.m. I tried to ignore it, but it started to feel like I was waiting for it, lying awake in bed, counting down the minutes until it came. One night after work, I was unlocking my door when I noticed something on my welcome mat. A folded piece of notebook paper, no envelope. I looked around the lot. Nobody was out, just the buzzing yellow streetlight. The note was short, written in neat block letters. "You pace when you're nervous, makes the floor shake." I froze, standing there with my key still in the lock. I had been pacing in my living room earlier that week, stressed about bills. But I never saw him outside, never heard him through the wall. How did he know? The next day, I knocked on his door. It took him a while to answer, but when he did, he leaned against the frame like he'd been expecting me. "Hey," I said, trying to sound casual. "Did you leave this?" I held the note out. He smiled, just a small curve of his mouth, nothing in his eyes. "People notice things," he said. "That's not really an answer. Not everything needs an answer." He tilted his head, studying me. "You should sleep more. You don't look good." And then he closed the door. I stood there in the breezeway for a long time, debating whether to call the manager. But what would I say? My neighbor is weird? He left me a note that may or may not be his. That night, I shoved my dresser against the wall between our bedrooms. It made me feel safer somehow, like a barrier. But at 3:12 a.m. the tapping came again, muffled but still there. This time it didn't stop. It went on for nearly 10 minutes, steady, patient, like whoever was doing it had all the time in the world. By November, little things started happening. My back door, always locked, was found unlatched one morning. My patio chair was moved slightly, angled toward his unit instead of the lot. And once, when I came home from work at 4 a.m., I caught him outside, standing dead still in the grass, just staring at my apartment. When he saw me, he didn't flinch or act embarrassed. He just said, "You walk lighter now." Good. I went inside and double-locked everything. The next day, another note slid under my door. This one just said, "Don't try to move. It's quieter here." By the time Thanksgiving came around, I was barely sleeping. Every sound in the building made me sit up in bed. I started keeping the TV on all night just to drown out the tapping. Sometimes it worked, sometimes it didn't. One morning after a long shift, I walked past his patio and saw something that made my stomach twist. On the little table outside his sliding door sat a camera, pointed directly at mine. It wasn't hidden, not even subtle, just sitting there in plain view. I knocked on his door again, louder this time. He opened it halfway, the chain lock still on. "What's with the camera?" I asked, my voice shaking. He looked at me calmly. "You should be careful how you leave your blinds. People can see too much." That's not what I asked. He smiled faintly. "I like keeping track of patterns. You have interesting ones." The way he said it, I had no response. He shut the door before I could speak again. That night, I pulled every curtain tight and covered the little gaps with tape. I even set my laptop camera to face the wall. I was halfway through microwaving dinner when I heard something slide under the front door. Another note. This one wasn't neat like the others. The letters were uneven, rushed. "You eat at the same time every night, doesn't it get boring?" My skin crawled. He wasn't guessing. He knew. I stopped using the microwave after that. I started eating at random times, cold food mostly. I hated that I was changing my life just to feel one step ahead of him, but I couldn't help it. Then one night around 2 a.m., I came back from work and noticed something wrong. My blinds were open, not wide, just enough to see in. I never left them like that. I dropped my bag and ran straight to the bedroom. Nothing was missing, nothing broken, but on my nightstand, sitting right next to my phone, was a Polaroid photo. It was me, sleeping. I didn't even own a Polaroid camera. I barely remember the hours after finding that photo. I sat on the edge of my bed with it in my hands, shaking so hard I could barely breathe. At some point, I shoved it in a drawer and just waited for the sun to come up. The next morning, I went straight to the property office. The manager, a woman in her 50s named Laura, listened as I explained everything: the notes, the tapping, the photo. She frowned, but kept glancing at the clock like she wanted me out of her office. "Unit 1A's been empty since July," she said flatly. I felt my stomach drop. "That's not true. He lives there. I've spoken to him. He's right there, every night." She shook her head. "Keys were turned in, no active lease. We'd know if someone was staying there." I begged her to come look with me. Finally, she sighed and agreed. We walked down together, and she unlocked the door to 1A. The place was bare. No furniture, no blinds on the windows, no camera on the patio table. Just empty beige carpet and the faint smell of dust. I stood there frozen, heart hammering. "He's here. I've seen him." Laura gave me this look like she thought I was losing it. "Maybe you should talk to someone," she said gently. "Stress does things to people." That night, I couldn't stay in my apartment. I drove around aimlessly until dawn, parked at a diner, and just sat there drinking burnt coffee until my hands stopped shaking. When I finally forced myself back home, I found something waiting on my patio chair. A Polaroid, face down. This one wasn't of me sleeping. It was of me standing in Laura's office the day before, holding the first photo in my hand. No note this time, just proof that whoever he is, he's still watching, and I don't know if he ever left. When I packed up and left Boston, I wasn't chasing some fresh start. I was just running out of money and excuses. My uncle knew a guy in Rutland, Maine, who had a one-bedroom above his hardware store. Nothing fancy, but it was cheap, month to month, and far from everyone I didn't want to see again. The place looked better from the outside than the inside. White siding, a little porch with a view of the harbor 2 blocks away. But the apartment itself smelled faintly like sawdust and paint thinner, and the radiator hissed even when it wasn't cold out. Still, I told myself I'd get used to it. My routine set in quick. Mornings I worked part-time at a coffee shop near Main Street. Afternoons I took long walks by the water or killed time scrolling job boards I never applied to. Nights were the worst. The town got so quiet after 9 p.m., you could hear the foghorn from the lighthouse miles away. The silence felt heavy, pressing. I only had one neighbor upstairs, directly above me. His name was Mark. He introduced himself on my second day, leaning over the railing while I unlocked my door. "New tenant?" he asked. He was in his early 40s maybe, balding, with a Red Sox sweatshirt and a voice that dragged like he was always tired. "Yeah," I said. "Just moved in." "I'm in 3B. Welcome to the neighborhood." He smiled briefly. "If you need anything, I'm around. Don't sleep much anyway." That last part sat with me longer than it should have. At first, he was fine, neighborly, even thoughtful. He knocked once to tell me my car lights were on, another time to offer me an extra roll of duct tape when I mentioned my window screen was loose. But the details he remembered started to feel strange. Like when I casually said I worked mornings, and a few days later he mentioned, "You're always back by 2:15, huh?" Or when he knocked to ask if the leftover Chinese food I reheated smelled better than the Thai place 2 streets down. I hadn't told him I'd ordered Chinese. The first week I brushed it off as coincidence, small town, thin walls, whatever. But on the 9th night, walking home from a late shift, I saw him standing on his porch in the fog. He didn't wave or say anything, just stood there, watching me walk the entire block until I disappeared into my doorway. I locked the door twice that night, and for the first time I wondered if I'd traded one problem back in Boston for something worse here in Maine. By the second week, the quiet didn't feel peaceful anymore. It felt like someone was always filling it. Mark's presence seemed constant. Not loud, not overbearing, just there. I'd hear his footsteps above me at odd hours, slow pacing, back and forth, like he was measuring the length of his living room. Sometimes at 2 or 3 in the morning, sometimes for hours. One afternoon, I was carrying groceries up the narrow stairwell when his door creaked open. "You always buy the same cereal," he said with a small smile. His eyes flicked to the box of Cheerios in my bag. I laughed awkwardly. "Yeah, old habits, I guess." "Routine's good," he replied. "Easier for people to know what to expect." The way he said it made my stomach twist, like it was less about me and more about him keeping track. That night, when I sat down at my desk to update my resume, I noticed the blinds in my living room window had been pulled halfway up. I was sure I'd left them closed. I froze for a full minute before convincing myself I was just misremembering, but I couldn't shake the image of Mark standing on his porch again, watching. 2 days later, my phone buzzed while I was folding laundry. It was a text from an unknown number. "You left your back window unlocked." I dropped the phone immediately, hands shaking. My first thought was, did I? I ran to check. The latch was open, just barely. My mind raced. Maybe it was my mistake. Maybe I was careless. But how would someone know? My apartment didn't face the street. The only people who could see that window were the neighbors upstairs. The next morning, I brought it up casually. "Hey, do you know if anyone else has access to this building? Maintenance or something?" Mark leaned against his railing, sipping coffee. "Just me and you." "Why?" "Nothing, just thought I heard something." He tilted his head, almost like he was amused. "Old buildings make noises. You'll get used to it." Then, after a pause, he added, "It's better not to overthink what happens at night." The words didn't sound like advice. They sounded like a warning. That evening, I pushed my dresser in front of the back window. It felt ridiculous, but I couldn't relax otherwise. Every creak of the floorboards above, every drag of his pacing, made me feel like my walls were thinner than paper. By the end of the week, I'd started sleeping with headphones on, just to drown it out. But even then, I woke up one night with the crushing feeling that someone had been standing in my apartment, watching, waiting. I tried to convince myself I was overreacting. People notice things. People make small talk. Maybe I was just primed to take it the wrong way. That's what I told myself the morning Mark showed up at the coffee shop where I worked. It was a Tuesday, slow shift, only a couple of regulars. He walked in like he'd been coming there for years, ordered a black coffee and sat at the corner table by the window. He didn't leave for 3 hours. Every time I glanced over, his eyes were already on me. Not in a friendly way, not even in a shy way. Just fixed. When my manager finally asked if I knew him, I shrugged. "He's my neighbor." "You want me to say something?" she offered. I shook my head quickly. The last thing I wanted was to make it worse. That night, when I came home, there was a sticky note on my door in neat handwriting. "You look tired when you work that long. Don't overdo it." I crumpled it up without thinking. My hands were sweating. The following day, I decided to change my schedule, asked my manager to swap me to later shifts. It felt like a small act of control. But when I got back around midnight, Mark was sitting on his porch again. Same spot, same silence. "You're late tonight," he called out. I froze halfway up the stairs. "Yeah, just covered for someone." He smiled faintly. "I figured you'd change things up sooner or later." I went inside without answering. My chest felt tight, like my own apartment wasn't even safe anymore. The next invasion was digital. I was scrolling on my laptop when I noticed a new email in my inbox. No subject, no sender name, just one line. "You should really close your curtains when you sleep. It's not safe." I slammed the laptop shut so hard it rattled the table. My throat went dry. It wasn't just about being watched anymore. It was the fact he wanted me to know. The pacing upstairs got worse. Some nights I'd hear him dragging furniture across the floor at 2 a.m. Other nights it was just the slow, steady walk, back and forth, back and forth. I'd lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, knowing he was awake too, maybe listening for me. One morning on my way down to the street, I noticed my doorframe had a faint scratch near the lock. Not big, but new, like someone had tried a key that didn't quite fit. That night, I shoved a chair under the handle and sat awake until sunrise. My chest ached from how hard my heart was pounding. Mark hadn't just been watching anymore. He'd started reaching into my life, testing the locks, testing the boundaries. And I knew the worst part wasn't what he'd already done. It was what he was waiting for. I lasted another week before everything snapped. It was a Thursday night, pouring rain. The sound on the roof almost covered the pacing above me, almost. Around 1 a.m., it stopped suddenly, like he'd frozen in place. I held my breath, waiting for it to start again. Instead, there was a sharp knock on my door. I didn't move. Another knock, harder this time. "Hey," Mark's voice called through the wood. "You awake?" I gripped the edge of the couch cushion so hard my fingers hurt. I wanted to yell at him to leave me alone, but my throat wouldn't work. After a pause, he spoke again, quieter this time. "You don't have to be scared. I don't like when you lock me out." My whole body went cold. Lock him out? I stayed silent. Eventually, his footsteps retreated up the stairs. But sleep wasn't an option anymore. I sat there, every light on, until the sun came up. That morning, I called the landlord. Left a message about strange behavior, the notes, the emails. He didn't pick up. Didn't call back either. When I dragged myself to work that afternoon, Mark was already there. Sitting in the same corner booth, same black coffee in front of him. He didn't look away when I walked in. At one point, when my manager stepped into the back, he finally spoke. "You know," he said, voice low, "people don't always appreciate when someone looks out for them. But I do it anyway." He smiled faintly, like it was a secret between us. "You can move. You can change your hours. But you can't change how predictable you are." My stomach turned. I mumbled something about needing to check on a drink order and walked away, hands trembling so bad I almost dropped the tray. That night I came home to find another note slipped under my door. This one was shorter, but it was enough to freeze me in place. "Why are you talking about me?" I didn't open the door, didn't move the chair from in front of it. I just sat there with my bag still on my shoulder, staring at the paper on the floor, realizing I had no idea how much he knew or how far he was willing to go. By 3 a.m., the pacing started again upstairs, slow, steady, each step like it was counting down. I thought about calling the cops, about throwing clothes into a bag and driving away that second. But I didn't. I just sat there, listening, heart thumping in time with the footsteps. Because the truth had finally settled in. If Mark wanted to get in, he already knew how. And the worst part? I wasn't sure anyone else would believe me until it was too late. When I left Burlington after the breakup, I told myself it was a reset. Not a collapse, not a failure, just hitting pause and starting over. The truth was a lot less romantic. My ex had the friends, the lease, even the dog. I had a couple duffel bags and too much silence. So when a one-bedroom opened up in an old brick walk-up near the center of Rutland, I took it without thinking twice. The rent was cheap, the floors creaked, and the radiators hissed like they were holding grudges, but it was mine. A door I could lock, a window I could open. The building wasn't much. 4 floors, no elevator, mailboxes jammed into the wall by the front door. Most of the tenants were older, or at least kept to themselves. Perfect. I figured I'd go to work at the sporting goods store, come home, heat up frozen dinners, maybe play Xbox until I fell asleep. Nothing complicated, nothing dramatic. The unit across from mine, 3B, looked empty at first. Curtains always drawn, mailbox never touched. For the first 2 weeks, I assumed it was vacant. Then one night, while fumbling with my keys after a late shift, the door creaked open. A man stood there, maybe late 30s, wearing a faded sweatshirt and sweatpants. His hair was messy but trimmed, his face pale in the hallway light. "You're the new one," he said, voice flat but steady. "Yeah," I said, forcing a small smile. "Just moved in a couple weeks ago." He didn't blink for a moment, just stared like he was memorizing me. Then he nodded once. "I'm Chris. I keep odd hours. If you hear me, don't worry." "Got it." He smiled faintly, like he thought it was a joke, only he understood. Then he closed the door. That first interaction stuck in my head. Not threatening, not exactly friendly either. Just off. Over the next week, I started noticing him more. When I left for work in the mornings, his door would be cracked, like he'd been standing there listening. Sometimes I'd catch a glimpse of him in the lobby, standing by the mailboxes, no mail in his hand. Once, while I was heading upstairs with a grocery bag, I swear I heard his door open behind me, footsteps pausing until I unlocked mine. I tried to shrug it off. Maybe he was just lonely. Maybe I was projecting my own mess onto a stranger. But the small things added up. The first was my doormat, a plain gray mat I'd bought at Walmart. One morning I opened my door to find it gone. That evening, it was back, only flipped upside down. The second was my lock. I know how my keys feel, how the lock turns. One night after work, the key slid in too easily, the knob turning with no resistance, like it hadn't been locked in the first place. The third was the note, a scrap of paper tucked under my door. 5 words, written in shaky block letters. "You walk heavy when sad." I stood there in the hallway, staring at it, every muscle in my body tight. No name, no explanation, just that. That night, for the first time since moving in, I pushed a chair under the door handle before going to bed. I told myself I was being paranoid, but deep down I knew better. The next couple of weeks blurred into routine. Work, home, TV, sleep. But I couldn't shake the feeling that my apartment wasn't really mine anymore. Every time I left, I checked the lock twice. Every time I came back, I scanned the floor for new notes. For a while, nothing happened, and I convinced myself I was overthinking. Then one morning, I found something strange in my mailbox. It wasn't addressed to me, not really. Just an envelope with no stamp, no return address. Inside was a single photo. Me, leaving the building, backpack slung over one shoulder. It was taken from upstairs, like from one of the windows looking down at the sidewalk. I froze right there in the lobby, the hum of the vending machine the only sound around me. I checked the back of the photo, but it was blank. When I looked up, Chris was standing at the bottom of the stairs watching. His hands were in his sweatshirt pocket, his face calm, unreadable. "Someone's paying attention," he said softly. Then he walked past me and out the front door. I didn't sleep much after that. A few days later, I got home late from work, arms full of groceries. When I unlocked my door, I nearly dropped everything. The lamp in the living room was on. I never leave it on. I stood there in the doorway, holding my breath. Nothing else looked disturbed. The windows were closed. My Xbox was still there. The fridge hummed like normal. Just that one light switched on. I told myself maybe I'd bumped it earlier. Maybe I'd forgotten. But when I looked closer, the bulb was warm, almost hot, like it had been on for hours. The next morning, there was another note under my door. "You look better in blue." I threw it away without reading it twice. But all day, at work, I kept looking down at my shirt. Blue polo, store uniform. That night, when I got home, Chris's door was open just a crack. I could see his eye in the gap, staring as I unlocked mine. I slammed the door shut behind me and locked it. I didn't push a chair under the handle that night. I pushed 2. I started keeping a notebook. Dates, times, little details. Anything that might help me prove something if it came to it. April 14th. Found photo. April 16th. Lamp on. April 18th. Note about shirt. Writing it down didn't make me feel safer, but it kept me from feeling crazy. One night I came home and found my window cracked open. Just an inch, but enough to let the cold spring air in. I never opened my windows, not once since moving in. I pulled it shut, locked it, and sat on the couch staring at the blinds until the sun came up. At work, I was useless. Customers asked simple questions, and I couldn't focus. My manager pulled me aside, asked if everything was okay. I lied and said I was fine. That evening, my phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. No words, just a picture. It was me again, but this time inside my apartment, sitting on the couch, eating takeout, scrolling on my phone. The picture was grainy, tilted like it had been taken through the blinds. I dropped the phone, heart hammering. Every nerve in my body lit up. I went straight to the window and yanked the blinds open. Across the street, in the second-floor window of the building opposite mine, the curtains moved. Just a twitch, like someone letting them fall back into place. I knew who it was. Later that night, I heard Chris's footsteps outside my door. Slow, deliberate, back and forth. He wasn't going anywhere, just pacing. At 2 a.m., a soft knock. Not loud, not urgent. Just 3 slow taps. I stayed silent. After a long pause, his voice came through the door. Calm, almost gentle. "You shouldn't shut people out, makes it worse." Then silence. I didn't sleep. By May, I couldn't take it anymore. I called the landlord, explained everything, the notes, the photos, the window. He sounded annoyed, like I was bothering him. "Look, Chris has been there longer than you," he said. "He's quiet, pays on time. If you're uncomfortable, maybe you should look for another place." I hung up before I said something I'd regret. That night, I decided to confront him, not with yelling, not with threats, just straight up, face to face. No games. When I knocked, his door opened immediately, like he'd been waiting. Chris stood there in the dim light, eyes locked on mine. His apartment smelled faintly of coffee and something sour. Behind him, I saw papers taped to the wall, dozens of them. Notes, scraps, maybe even photos. "You've been in my apartment," I said, voice shaking but steady enough. He tilted his head, like I'd asked a riddle. "You leave doors unlocked," he replied. "Sometimes windows too. That's not safe." "I don't leave them unlocked," I snapped. He smiled then, slow and thin. "You do. You just don't realize it." I felt my stomach twist. "Stay out of my place. I mean it." He didn't argue, didn't threaten, just nodded once like we'd reached some kind of agreement. Then he closed the door in my face. I went back inside, locked every bolt, shoved the couch against the door. The next morning, there was no note, no pacing, nothing. For 2 days it was quiet. Then, on the third night, I woke up to the buzz of my phone. A new message from the same unknown number. It was another photo. Me, asleep in bed. The timestamp read, 2:37 a.m. I stared at it until the screen went dark, pulse hammering in my ears. Then I realized something that made my blood run cold. The angle wasn't from the window. It wasn't from outside. It was from inside the room. My name's Tyler. I'm 29, single, and I just moved to Boise a few months ago. After my last job in Denver collapsed, I got laid off from a startup that barely lasted a year. I felt like I needed a reset. No friends, no drama, just space to figure things out. Boise was cheaper, quieter, and close enough to drive home if I needed to. I found an apartment complex on the west side of town. 3 floors, beige siding, tiny balconies that all looked the same. The kind of place you pick because rent's reasonable, not because it feels like home. My unit 2C faced the parking lot. From my balcony, I could see the whole row of cars, the dumpster, and the office across the street. I started freelancing online, mostly editing short videos for small businesses. It wasn't much, but it paid bills. Most days I worked from the couch, kept my blinds half closed, and avoided attention. The first few weeks passed without much incident, except for the neighbor above me, Unit 3C. I didn't see him at first, but I noticed his balcony light. It wasn't normal yellow or white. It was this pale green glow that stayed on all night, like someone left a cheap aquarium light running. I figured he just liked it that way. Then one night, about a week after I settled in, I heard a knock at my door. Not urgent, just steady. I opened it and saw a man maybe late 30s, tall, sharp nose, glasses that caught the hall light. He was holding a small bag of groceries. "Hey," he said, calm, almost monotone. "I'm Mark, upstairs in 3C. "Oh, hey," I said. "Tyler just moved in." He nodded. "Yeah, I noticed new things." We stood there a second too long before I muttered, "Cool, nice to meet you." He didn't leave right away. He tilted his head like he was studying me. "Do you ever feel watched when you're working?" he asked suddenly. The question threw me. Not really." He smiled faintly. "That's good." Then he turned and went upstairs. I chalked it up to awkward neighbor talk. But that night, I noticed something new. When I turned off my lights around midnight, his balcony light flickered brighter for a second, like he wanted me to know it was still on. Mark didn't make much noise, but I always knew he was awake. Some nights, I'd hear faint thumps above me, a chair scraping across the floor, or a steady shuffle like he was pacing. But the weird part wasn't the sounds, it was the timing. Always around 1:15 a.m. At first I thought I was being paranoid, but it kept happening. One night I sat in bed, staring at the ceiling, counting seconds. At exactly 1:15, the footsteps started. Slow, careful, then silence. The next day I bumped into him near the mailbox. He was holding a thick envelope with no return address. I made small talk. "You're up late a lot, huh?" He gave me that same blank half smile. "I hear you too." The way he said it made me grip my keys tighter. Later that week I noticed something strange on my phone. A new Wi-Fi network popped up, its name, 2C Night Owl. My unit, my routine. I stared at it for a long time, trying to convince myself it was coincidence. But who else would name a network like that? The next night, I heard faint tapping through the ceiling. Not random. 3 taps, pause, 3 more. Like a code. The following morning, a slip of paper was wedged under my door. Neat handwriting. "You toss and turn too much. Try breathing slower." My skin crawled. Nobody could have known that, unless they were listening. I called the apartment office, explained the Wi-Fi name, the notes, the noises. The manager nodded politely, said they'd remind residents to respect privacy, but I could tell they thought I was exaggerating. That night, I set up my laptop camera facing my door. If anyone came in, I'd catch it. At 2 a.m., I woke to a faint click. I held my breath. 10 minutes later, my phone buzzed. An airdrop request popped up. A file labeled "Smile Move." My heart pounded. I denied it instantly, but the request popped up again, and again. I shut my phone off and sat in the dark, gripping a kitchen knife until sunrise. When I checked my laptop footage, nothing showed. No one came in. No movement. Just silence. Later that day, I found my balcony door unlocked. I swore I'd locked it. That night, the Wi-Fi network changed. Its new name. Nice shirt tonight. I hadn't left my apartment all day. The only way he could have known what I wore was if he saw me inside. I decided I couldn't stay. I packed bags quietly, planning to leave in the morning. But that night I heard something new. My own voice. It came from the ceiling, muffled but clear. A recording of me on the phone with my sister, laughing about a stupid video. Then another, me reading out loud from an article while editing. Clips I never knew were recorded. I jumped on a chair and pressed my ear to the vent. The audio stopped instantly. Then came Mark's voice. Calm, steady. "You sound different when you know I'm here." I nearly knocked the chair over, scrambling down. I didn't sleep. I waited until sunrise, carried my bags out, and left the key on the counter. I moved in with a friend across town, haven't been back since. But 2 weeks later, while checking for Wi-Fi in the new place, one popped up at the bottom of the list. Tyler doesn't sleep.